In this presentation, we are going to look at multiple choice questions, or MCQs, in a range of different contexts. In Part 1, we will go over the structure of an MCQ item and look at the terminology we use in item writing. In Part 2, we will go over the advantages and disadvantages that are associated with such item types. In Part 3, we will go over a list of top tips that can act as a sort of checklist when you're producing such content. Finally, in Parts 4 and 5, we will look at examples of MCQs. Part 4 will focus on items which serve as good examples of best practice, and in Part 5, we will look at items which display some of the most common pitfalls. In this section, we will look at the structure and terminology of MCQs. MCQs are widely used in language testing. This is an example of an MCQ that might appear in a listening or reading paper. There is the question itself, which is sometimes referred to as the stem. In this example, the stem is an actual question. However, the stem can also be used as a gapped sentence, as you will see in the grammar items. The specifications will state the appropriate format. The possible answers are referred to as the options. Within the options, you will also have the key, as well as the distractors. Most MCQs will have either 3 or 4 options. Having only 2 options is less effective, since it increases the chance of getting it right purely by guesswork. In this section, we will look at some of the advantages and disadvantages. MCQs are ubiquitous in language testing. They certainly have many advantages. They are very versatile. They can occur in tasks of all skills and at all levels. This is because you can structure them to target information in a way that's appropriate for both lower levels and higher levels. For example, they can require test takers to identify either concrete information and more abstract opinions. Another advantage is that they are easy and reliable to mark. These days, it is often done by a computer which has been programmed with the correct answer. They are also commonly used around the world, meaning they are high in face validity. Test takers are familiar with the format and what they need to do. Disadvantages of MCQs include the fact that they do not necessarily mirror real-life skills. For example, although we may aim to target a sub-skill, such as listening for specific information, answering an MCQ is not, in and of itself, a real-life task. MCQ grammar items in particular can also be decontextualized. The stem is just an isolated sentence with no further context. This means that they can be particularly susceptible to having more than one possible answer. MCQs are also very product-oriented. This means that we know whether a test taker is right or wrong, but we don't know how they got there. It could have been, for example, through guessing, or logic, or in some other construct-irrelevant manner. Test wiseness can be an issue here. If test takers know that they simply need to choose the most logical answer, this can invalidate the task, as they are no longer demonstrating language ability. Here, we will look at some top tips which should help you avoid the most common mistakes. Here are just some of the things you should always keep in mind. Firstly, make sure that the question is appropriate for the level. For example, at lower levels, you may need to target concrete and sentence-level information, while at higher levels, you might need to target an opinion that is not directly stated, but depends on having understood the text at a global level. In order to minimize the effect of test wiseness, MCQs should always be immune from logic and guesswork. If it is ever possible to select the key because it's the most obvious answer, then this will need to be revised. Similarly, if it is possible to guess an answer based on pre-existing world knowledge, this is something that would also need revision. In the case of reading and listening, it must always be necessary to read or listen to the text in order to select the correct answer, irrespective of your ability. Similarly, in grammar items, grammatically incorrect options are not permitted, since they can simply be dismissed without actually having read the stem sentence. It is useful to keep the options similar in length and in grammatical structure. This can help make sure no option stands out for any reason. However, there must only be one possible answer. In grammar items in particular, some options may be possible in certain varieties of English, even if they are non-standard. The trick, therefore, is making sure that all the distractors are plausible while ensuring the key is the only possible answer. However, as a general rule of thumb, it is best to have one piece of main information per option. Options which contain two pieces of main information can become very confusing. We will look at an example of this later. In this section, we will look at some effective examples of MCQs and discuss the reasons why. We suggest you pause the video at each question in order to reflect on why it is effective. This is an example of a finalized version of an MCQ from a listening B2 item. As you can see, it is appropriate at B2 level because it focuses on more abstract opinions rather than concrete information. Importantly, the options are all plausible answers to the question. All could be the opinion of a film critic. Even a fully proficient language user would need to listen to the text to find out the answer, and this is what we should be aiming for. Of course, the success of a question will depend upon the text itself, but we will cover this in more detail in the relevant modules. Here is another example of an A2 listening MCQ from a finalized item. As you can see, the focus of the information is much more concrete. However, the same principles apply. All could be plausible answers to the question. All options have a similar grammatical structure, and so there is no answer that stands out for any obvious reason. Finally, here is an example from Grammar B1. As you can see, the stem is in the form of a gap fill rather than a question. The item is targeting knowledge of the present perfect continuous. The options include the same base verb, to try, in present perfect continuous, past simple, simple past, and present continuous forms. As such, the question is not only testing knowledge of form, but also of meaning. In order to select the right answer, the test taker needs to be aware that the sentence is referring to an ongoing and unfinished activity, and that the present perfect continuous is the way this meaning is expressed in English. Lower level test takers, for example, may see the reference to an ongoing activity only, and therefore be drawn to the present continuous option. In this way, we can more effectively discriminate between higher and lower level test takers. You might notice that the key is longer, but all the options are slightly different lengths, and nothing is therefore particularly conspicuous. In this section, we will look at some examples of MCQs which have required editing and discuss the reasons why. As before, we suggest you pause the video at each question in order to reflect on what the issues might be. This is an example of a listening B2 item from a first draft. One issue is that option B is not entirely logical. If something is good value for money, this still implies the quality is good or at least acceptable. Similarly, in option C, the food arriving late is not really an opinion. However, the major issue with this question is the double-barreled options. In each instance, the test taker is required to focus on two key pieces of information. This is a problem since the item also becomes a test of how much information the listener can retain in their short-term memory. And this is less relevant to the target construct of listening. It is true that this is quite a challenging item, which should be the case at B2 level, but unfortunately, it's not challenging for the right reasons, and so this would need revision. This is an example of a listening B1 item from a first draft. The first issue is the question stem. It contains a relative clause. If you refer to the exponents list, you will see that relative clauses are a B2 exponent. As this item is at B1 level, this will need revision. Another issue is that the key, in this case option A, is the most logical answer. If you were going to guess, this is probably the option you would go for. Option B includes the collocation national treasure, which is a little idiomatic in British English at least, and is commonly used to refer to people rather than artifacts. The idea of metal detector enthusiasts becoming the owners, which is a very unusual verb in the context, of such a treasure is much more outlandish when compared with the others, and this option would need revision for the next draft. This is from a vocabulary item. An item such as this would likely be assigned red status, because it is possible to fill in the gap without even reading the options. The two distractors, car and radio, are completely illogical in the context and do not, therefore, serve any purpose. This item is quite a glaring example of an obvious option with illogical distractors. This is an example of a grammar A2 item. Here, the problem is that distractive B, did you saw, is incorrect as a standalone segment of English. This means it can be dismissed without reading the stem. This is not permitted, so would need to be revised. Here, you can see the same A2 grammar item, but now edited so that the incorrect segment has been corrected. However, there still could be a final edit. This is because the item aims to test simple past. However, every option is testing some variations of simple past. As such, the item is only a test of form. If we want to target meaning as well as form, we can put one of the options into the present tense. For example, if we change option B to "Do you see?", then the options are testing whether the test taker knows both whether it is simple past, meaning, and whether it is a question, form. Such items which are able to target both meaning and form are the ideal. Thank you very much for your attention. As you can see, although the MCQ format is a simple one, it is not as easy as it looks to produce effective items. There are many points you'll need to keep in mind. If you follow these tips, however, you'll find that it's a skill you can soon develop. Please comment below in the forum if you have any questions or reflections.